I know we tried to cover a little too much, maybe a lot in the first video, but we'll kind of
Okay.
take a deeper dive in this one. How are you
All
feeling
right,
after
let's
the
go.
first video? You ready?
That was good. That was good. You did good.
Okay. All right, here we go. All right, so this video, we are going to focus on the left side of the designer, all of these random tabs. We're going to take a deeper dive into each one so that you kind of understand, because unless you hover them, they'll kind of show you what they are, but otherwise you're just going off the symbols. So when I started, I'll kind of take a step back. When I started learning, the several of the people I was following and taking courses through, it was you're not going to learn something until you use it, which seems like a really good way to start learning a program. If I'm not using something, I'll just push it down the road. The problem is when you start to solve problems, because this building in Webflow is kind of about putting a puzzle together. When you are handed 4 or 5 pieces and everything seems to work really well, it fits together, it makes it really simple. The problem is when you're only shown one way or one set of tools or solutions, when you run into a roadblock, it can get very challenging because you didn't kind of learn the surrounding content. So I think I'm going to try to remedy that mistake, and we are going to end up taking a deeper dive into each of the elements, each of the topics than you might be ready for or need. But I think long term, it'll help you when you run into a challenge or you're trying to design something. You'll know all of the options and you can easily start eliminating stuff instead of only having 2 options available to you. You're like, all right, neither of these work. Now I've got to go learn a whole new tool set or way of doing things. Does that sound good
Yeah.
to you?
All right. You're the
Okay.
teacher.
All right. All right. So our first tab here is the elements. So I've kind of blocked all these down so they kind of just a little easier to read. So
All right.
this is your canvas, this white screen. So to build your website, websites are built in the block model, which is, I guess, very similar to WordPress. This isn't any different. And that is every section on every website is a square inside of a square with different content. So if we look at this right here, the whole website is one big square. Then right here, we've got this white square with the canvas. Right here, we've got another
Sure.
square, and inside that. So that is the structure of web design, is just squares and squares. So anytime you're adding any elements, and we'll explain that right now, to the canvas, you'll be using this plus button. So another way to get to this, and this might be too soon, but I'll tell you. So when you're over on the canvas, if you don't want to open this up and go and look for something, you can just over here hit Command E, and that'll find anything, and you can just type in, oh, I want a section. And there it is. So instead of going over here and grabbing a section and dragging it on, you can just hit Command E and pop it up. So that's a really quick way to find stuff. All right, so in our elements panel, let's see how many are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's seven different sections of content. Are you ready for them? We're gonna kind of take a deep
I'm
dive.
ready.
So, all right.
I'm
So you're
ready. I'm
very,
writing notes. That's what
all
I'm
right,
doing here.
all right, good. All right, so the first section is the layout section. So this is pure structure of uh, organizing your canvas. So you see there are 4 in here, and they're
Okay.
titled section, container, grid, and columns. So
Okay.
I'm going to open up basic here because it might help to understand this. All right, so the basic building of all of Webflow is this div block right here, okay? This div block. This is the most common thing you'll probably use. This will be 50 to 70% of the elements you drag onto the canvas will be this div block. So Webflow has preset styles to the div block and has called them section, container, grid, and columns. So
Okay.
this section is full width. This container is not full width. So Webflow has just gone in and created classes and stylings for these. So we are never going to use any of these layout items, the ones
Oh.
Webflow made. We will always be doing them from scratch. The issue is Webflow has already put styles on them that might not work with our site. And so instead of dragging container on and having to remove the styles, and then every time you drag a new container on, you have to make sure the styles are cleaned. you will just drag a div block. And so, for example, we might drag a div block here, and we might call it section. But that has very different styles than adding a section here. Because if you notice, this section says section, but there's no class over here. And I know class, we're going to kind of get ahead of ourselves. But this has this is a div block with the class of section. So that is how we will be building those. So for any layout, any structure, we will just be using the div blocks. You don't ever have to worry about the layout panel. We will never use those. So here we've got the div block. That's our most prominent element. I would definitely make note of that. If you are ever trying to organize or structure something, you will grab a div block. So we've also got list, where you can make just a simple list. So this could be number 1, this could be number 2, this could be number 3. So it's just another pre-styled that Webflow has made for us. So that's the list. We've got list items, which I think would just drag that. Wait, let's see, drag that into the list. So that would just add a 4th item. Now we've got 4. We don't use this very often. We've got a link block and a button. So let me pull both of those out here. Okay. So here's how the link block is different than a div block. I'm assuming you can very easily guess this. So a link block, anything you put in it. So if I put a heading in there, or I put the list inside of the link block, what is ever in the link block, wherever you click on that, is the link to the same thing.
Okay.
So it is just a div block that when you click it, it pulls you to another URL. Okay. A button does the same thing, but you are limited with what you can put in it. You're really doing text. So you could go, 1, 2, 3, 4, but you're very limited. So you've got a classic button, very similar to WordPress. You can do a lot of things with that. That's also very useful. So in our first panel, in the basic panel, the only 3 things we'll really be using are the button, the link block, and the div.
So we got a div block, a button,
and a link block.
And the link block?
Yes. So those are the 3 things to pay attention in basic. So in typography, we've got 6 different options. So your very first one is heading. So any largely styled item that you're going to actually, let me delete all this other stuff we built. All right, so anytime you're trying to style text and you don't want to just be a paragraph, you'll always add a heading in. And then you've got your paragraph text, very common.
Yeah.
Then you've got a text link. So we can do 1, 2, 3, 4. So instead of putting a link block, I could put, so let's do Command E. We're going to do link block. So now I will, inside of this, add a paragraph, and I'm using Command E to open this up. Get rid of our lorem ipsum. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those don't look any different.
Nope.
So the one is a link block, and the one is a text link. So I can add more things into this link block. So if I want an image in here, I would use the link block. Let's see, where were we? So we've got, our heading, our paragraph, our text link, our text block, which is very similar to our paragraph, but we'll have to get into some text details before I think we dive deeper into how they're different. And then we can set up.
Can you minimize the basic block so that I can see that, since our pictures are over top of that? Can you compact the basic block?
The basic block.
Up above the typography block, if you can.
You want me to move like our...
Yeah, that'll work too. Or if you just compact the basic block up top, that would do the same.
Oh, gotcha. I see what you're saying. Okay. Right. There we go. No, let me throw you
Perfect.
back. That way it kind of stays the same.
Thank you.
All right. So you've got your most common text things are your heading and paragraph. So those are the 2 I would make note of. The link block and the text block are not used very often, either with and not quote either. So the other one you want to pay attention to is rich text. So rich text is how you style a blog. So for example, if you have a blog and you know you're going to have a heading, you're going to have paragraphs, you're going to have H2s, instead of having to add in every element one after the other, the
Yeah,
rich text allows you to quickly add in, you can add videos, you can add images, you can add graphics all inside of this. Whereas up here, it's really hard to add an image in your heading because that's not the same
sure.
element. So rich text
Yeah.
is important for blog or any long content. So those are your important
Okay.
items in typography, your heading, your paragraph, and your rich text.
Okay.
So far we've covered three of the categories, and really the only things that are going to matter to you are the div block, the button, the link block, the heading, the paragraph, and the rich text. All right, so next under CMS, whenever you are trying to transport the data from your CMS collection, you will take a collection list. And this won't really make sense right now, but that is how you'll, once you create a CMS, that's how you'll utilize it.
So that's more like in a situation like the blog that we talked about.
Yes, yes. So for example, when you, let's say your blog, all of them had an image that you attach in your database.
Yeah.
You can now drag in an image element. So let's just go over here. I can do Command E. I can grab an image. I don't know if it's going to work because we don't have a. All right, we will save that for later. Getting ahead of myself here. All right, so that's under the CMS tab. All right, the
Yep.
media tab, you can pull in an image, you can pull in a video, you can pull in YouTube, and you can pull in a Lottie animation. So the image is going to be a very common one, and
Yep.
then video and YouTube somewhat. And so I don't know, are you familiar with Lottie animations? Do you know what those are?
You, I've seen them only enough to, yeah.
Okay. So in what it is pretty much a short video, a series of still images in sequence. So a 2 or 3 second video might have 100 frames. And a Lottie animation allows you to trigger a scroll, a hover, a click, and determine how many of those frames show up and over what period of time when you're doing that. So you can change 2 bars into an X as your Lottie animation, and then undo it when you click it again. And so that's a Lottie animation. You're changing the frames, so it's kind of like a short controllable video.
Okay.
So that's your media tab. All right, so down in forms, you have let's see, is that 10 options? So you can only put, I'm going to delete all of this stuff. You can only put form elements inside a form block. So that kind of compacts all of this stuff. Everything we're going to look at here has to go into a form block. So for example, if I try to drag this submit button outside of the form, you can see this red arrow. Submit button can only be placed in a form. So I have to go up into this form block and submit it.
Yep.
So if you were, let's say you didn't have a submit button, and you go and you're like, all right, I want to add a button, a submit button to my thing, to my contact form. This is just a regular button. It's not hooked to your form button. So you always want to make
Yep.
sure you're searching for your anything going into
Form
a form in
content.
that whole tab. Yes. So anytime you're building a form, that's where you're going. And all of those have to go into a form. So if you're not building a form, you know you can close that off and that won't matter. All right, and your last one is the components here. I'm going to try to, let's move our images. This might kind of get funky. All right, so the components tab has several really useful elements you can add, but they're not very common. All right, so let's just go over them really quickly, and I'll tell you which ones to make note of. So starting down here, you've got 2 social media elements. So this is where you can link your socials on the site. So you
Yep.
can do Twitter, Facebook. Most of the times when I'm doing builds, I will not use these options. I'll make my own because most times you're connecting to 5 or 6 social platforms. And so having these 2, you don't want to have 2 that are elements and then 4 you're building separately. You'll probably just want to grab them all and build them custom. The next one is
Yep.
you can have a Maps, Google
Okay.
Maps embed. These 2 right here, the slider or tabs, these are ones I would make note of. So we'll drag them over to the canvas. So we'll grab the slider and the tabs. All right. So as you might be able to just guess based on how familiar you are with WordPress. So we're going to start with the slider. So the slider allows you to make content inside these frames and then change the frames. So obviously we don't have anything in right now. And then tabs, same as slider. You can tab through different content and you can style the content underneath it. And there's some pretty powerful things you can do with sliders and tabs in Webflow. So I definitely make note of those two. The search option, you can enable search in Webflow. It is kind of complicated because if you're going to enable search, you've got to go in and say, let's say you've got a heading on your home page that says web design, and you also have a blog article on web design. If somebody goes in and searches web design, you don't want them to see the web design header that's just on your website. It's like, oh, this is a service we offer. You want them to go to a blog post. So it can be hard to configure, or not hard, it's time consuming to configure search, but some clients are definitely in need of that. So anytime there's a blog, you definitely want to enable search. All right, then the next one is navbar, and this is one that you're going to see on every page, and we'll use this one. So this is, let's say, it's placed on the bottom. This is your starting component to, let's see, delete. Oop, I got to go to delete the tabs, delete that. There we go. That's where the Navigator comes in handy. You can see where you're at. All right, so using the native Webflow navbar is very important. They have put in already certain settings that help with accessibility, that help for tabbing, that help for letting voice readers know that that's where you're at on a navbar. So you'll definitely want to use the native one and not build them custom. The one thing we'll notice though is inside our navbar, if we go over to the Navigator, we can now click into these elements and it'll kind of show us everything that's in there. You'll notice though that this is the container. This is the custom container class from Webflow. So anytime you add the navbar, you want to delete this container and we'll just throw in a navbar of our own. So we can go over here, we can grab a div block.
Div block, yeah.
Yep. So here's how you add it in. So so we're going to jump down now from elements to the Navigator.
Navigator.
So anytime you add an element to the canvas, it'll pop up at the very bottom, or I guess wherever you drop it, I suppose, of your Navigator. Yep. So you can try to manually, like we can grab this div block on the canvas and try to like put it where we want it. Sometimes it can be hard to finagle it. So we can just come over to our Navigator and just, we want it right up by our container. So it is now inside the container. You can see the layers. Inside the navbar is a container. Inside the container is all of this stuff. So what we want to do is we want to put everything inside the navbar and delete the container. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull the div block up here. And we're going to bring in the brand into the div block. We're going to bring up the nav menu in here. Oop, no, I don't want to place it in it. No. So I'm just dragging them over. I'm just dragging them up and then over until it kind of snaps in. So now I'm deleting that container. And there we go. Now we can make settings to the nav bar without worrying about Webflow's custom stuff.
Interesting. Right, so it's kind of like in WordPress where you can, in the menu, you can drag it over to kind of create the hierarchy.
Yes. So touchback. So all these elements, so every element that is underneath another element is called the child element. So if you open up navbar, this div block is a child of navbar, and navbar is the parent element of div block. So if we were to add in, I'm going to Command E, and I'm going to open up another div block, and I'm going to place it right in here. And if I pop it right over, not in there. So right now it is a sibling element because they are on the same level. So right now it's a sibling. If I pop it in it, it becomes a child element. All right, a couple more things we'll cover here. So we did navbar. All right, so Lightbox. Are you familiar with Lightbox?
Is that just, I know I've used it before. Is that just for displaying images?
Yes, yep. So if you want, let's say you had a group of images from, let's say, Instagram or something, and when you place them, they're individual elements. So a light box allows someone to click on something and full screen it, and then you can make other elements or other light box elements. Um, I guess you could call them sibling elements, where you can open up any of the images and all of the other group of images appear in that light box also. So some cool settings with that. Then you've got a background video. So if you want to have your hero section, have some text and a cool background, like I think we've done on some other sites, you can just drag this over and place it in. Then you've got the last two are drop down. So the drop down will be used for most commonly your nav bar. So let's say we want to drag a drop down. We're just going to pop it right up here. And now it says drop down. So this is how you would add a drop down menu in your Navigator. So I just dragged that nav bar or the drop down right over here. So that's what that does. Oops, where were we? And then the last one is the HTML embed. So if you want to put in any custom code, if you want to put in some snippets, some APIs from some social media platforms or something, or anything that takes HTML code, you can just drag that embed over and then edit it on screen with HTML. So that is all of the elements, and I know it was a lot, but I think it's important to know. For example, so I'll just recap real quickly. We don't use any of the layouts options. These are Webflow's native. No layouts. In basic, our primary, anytime you're adding structure, we will be using a div block and then styling it. So that's the most important one in that. Okay. Typography, we're going to be mainly focusing on heading and paragraphs and then styling those. We're not going to be dealing with CMS till further down, but there's only one thing you can drag in under CMS, and that's your collection list. Then you've obviously got your media, where you can bring in images, videos, or lottie animations. You've got your forms, which everything in this panel is only going to be used in forms. So you don't have to worry about any of these elements unless you're using a form. And then the components, the ones to keep in mind are the slider and tabs. And then obviously when you're building your nav bar, and drop down. All right, do you have any questions regarding the elements tab? Besides the sheer quantity of content.
I'm looking over my notes because I did do a good. I took a bunch of notes. I was just seeing if I had anything that jumped out at me from my notes. Let's see. That was good. I think I'll probably have some good questions once I actually get my hands on the mouse, get to start using them. Then I'm going to come up with some good questions, I'm sure.
Yes. But otherwise, we can move on to the next.
From now, I think I'll be ready to tear off my next sheet of paper and move on to the next section.
All right. So the next one we're doing is symbols. Okay.
All right.
Let me know when you're ready. All right. So here's what a symbol is. Let's see. Let's just use the nav bar as an example. So a symbol allows you to very quickly add a group of elements to different pages or a different section at the bottom of your page, something like that. So if we open up our nav bar, which is this third one right here, it's kind of like stacked thing, we can see that inside the nav bar, there's the div block, the brand, the nav menu, all of these elements, okay? So what a symbol does is make a copy of the nav bar. So let's imagine, like we already went and made the change where we added the div block in. Had we not been making a symbol, let's say we Command E, that's our search, and now we search for nav bar. Let's say we're on a different page. Our nav bar that we now just added looks completely different than the one we've already built.
Right.
So if you didn't have a symbol, you would have to go in, and every time you go to a new page, you have to redesign all of the elements. So a symbol allows you to make a group element. So you click right here while you have the element selected. So I want to do the nav bar. So I've got the nav bar selected, and I'm going to go over to the symbol thing. I'm going to create a new symbol, and I'm going to name this symbol nav bar. Boom.
So if I were going to name it something, I would maybe name it something different than a symbol. Is symbol kind of a weird word to call this? Is that just me?
I have
were they running out of words? And then in the naming convention, what do we call it? Like the Nessie name bar, nav bar? Would that just be
Um,
the
no,
just
just nav
for me
bar
to
is
make
fine.
sense of it?
You certainly could. You could name it whatever you wanted. Had this been a site with subdomains, and you've got a Nessie dot whatever and a Bigfoot dot whatever, you certainly could.
Right.
But since we're only doing this one, navbar is just fine.
It,
Yeah, you can certainly do that.
it would be understand. Yeah, because it would. I guess it would be obvious. Okay, so all right.
All right. So
I think I understand. A symbol is basically just a group or a template's not the right word either.
it's kind of like a template. Yes, I mean that's pretty much what it is. It is a small version of a template.
Okay.
So I was holding the nav bar, and while I had it, the
Yep.
nav bar selected, I went over to the symbols and I added it, and then I named it. So
Okay.
now that I've named it, you can see that every time I hover over it, it's green. Do you see that?
Okay. Yep.
And now when I go to our navigator, you'll notice instead of being like we had what 10 or 12 different elements, it's all just one now.
Yep. Oh,
So
interesting.
so let's say I wanted to edit this symbol. To edit, say right now
Yep.
I can't. So you have to double click on a symbol, and it kind of now grays out, opaques everything else, and now you are in editing that symbol. Okay.
Okay.
So to edit, you're in this symbol, and now you can make a change. And if we say hello instead of home, oops, that's now going to change. So if we now Command E, bring in, we search now navbar, and here's our navbar symbol. We don't want to use the regular navbar.
Yep.
It now changed to hello. So
Okay.
if now I go in here and I type hi, you'll notice it's immediately changing the top one.
Right.
So any change I make to a symbol changes all other symbols.
Nice.
That's pretty cool. It's very handy. So let's say
Yeah.
I'm on my home page, and so let's say I type in home here, and I'm at my home page, and let's say I don't want it to appear on my home page. I don't want to waste one of my tabs as the home tab. So what I can do is I can double click, and I can right click once I'm in it, and I can wait. Oops. Sorry, maybe I right click, and I can click unlink instance.
Okay.
So it's now copied everything that I had done, but now I can say hello.
Okay.
So
So
it
you
went in and
can.
it copied it once. When I unlink the instance, it no longer takes the changes with it, but I can quickly populate all the data that was on the symbol over.
And so now, any other time, so now if you go to the bottom one, that is still a symbol, and now you make a change, it's not going to ever make any other change.
It is not going to make a change. However, if I add a new element and I use the nav bar symbol, it'll still pull from this one.
Right. And vice versa.
Yes. So in our style panel, so this is, we haven't gotten over here yet, but there is a way to, let's say in our symbol, we can now go over here and say, I want to make something an override field. So an override field allows you to create a symbol and pre-say, hey, inside this symbol, you're allowed to change this and it won't affect anything else. So we won't go into that right now. We'll see if during the project build we come up with something where we'll actually want to utilize that. But there are ways to say, hey, copy everything, but don't copy the image. I can change the image on every page. So there's some really cool
Okay.
options you can do. So you're not just stuck with having to unlink stuff. Because if I now change the location, let's say I go in here and I want to change this drop down over here, I'm gonna have to go to every place I unlinked it and do the same thing.
Right.
And so it can get very annoying. All right, so that's your symbols. That's how they work. You can create new ones. You can, all you have to do is, so let's say I could now come up to this one and I can go over to symbols and I can create a new symbol and I can be like nav bar hello. And now that's my hello nav bar.
And it turned red there for a second because you had already named something red, nav bar.
Yeah, so before I had started typing more, yeah, that's why I did it.
Okay,
Can't be named the same.
So you could, right, nice.
Yes. So you'll also notice, let's say I don't want this hello nav bar, okay? When I come over here and click edit, I cannot delete. So you cannot delete a symbol that's been used on the page. So you'll notice it says, oh, there's one instance of this being used on the website. So I would have to come over here and I would either have to unlink it, unlink instance, and now I can go to my symbol, and now I can go delete this.
Mm.
So you have to make sure everything's unlinked so you're not destroying your website as you go. So that's kind of cool.
Nice.
All right, so our next tab is the nav bar, the Navigator, and this is how you can quickly see the hierarchy of everything on your website. So this is very helpful. Instead of like, let's say I want to come over here and I want to click this drop down thing, I have to come over here and I have to like, where do I want stuff? Or I can just pop up the nav bar and I can see exactly what order something's in. So maybe it's better if I wanted to like switch. Let's say I wanted to move this icon somewhere else. Okay, it's gonna be tricky to do right now. It's just easier to open up the Navigator. So a couple things over here, these buttons up here. So the first one is you can, I guess my screen's not wide enough. If you're working full screen, you can click this little expand button and it will shrink or expand this so you can see more of the canvas. This button is either collapse all or expand all. So instead of having to go open up navbar, open up this, open up this, open up this, I can just quickly expand them all. So that's pretty helpful. So Navigator, very important, helpful tool for quickly finding something inside your site, organizing stuff, etc.
And so it's turning locations blue as you're hovering on it over in the designer field. So as you're
yes.
mousing over.
Yes, so I can find exactly where I am, and vice versa. I can come over, I can come over to my Navigator and I can click items and you can see it kind of lightly graze it as I move down.
So if you click on it, will it then turn blue? Oh no, it won't. Okay.
If I click it, it opens it. But over here, I can now quickly go to the drop-down list and start making changes over here. All right, so that's the Navigator. Right. The next is the pages, which I don't think there's much to go over here. This is how you would add a new page. So you can click up here, create new page. You can now name your page, give it a slug. This is some of the SEO settings we'll talk about later, how you display how it comes up when you're searching. Same with Open Graph. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Open Graph. Open Graph is how content would appear on social media if it's either shared or pushed. If you posted your website, you can choose what image and stuff comes up based on what URL you're using. And then this is some site search settings, which would be very important if you're enabling search on the website. And then you can add custom code. Obviously, we don't have the hosting plan enabled, which we will later. And that's all in this thing. So those are all your just page utilities. So we're not going to open up a new page. So that's the Pages tab right here. This is where also it'll showcase when you create new CMS collections. You'll find those in here. Okay. All right, so our next one is our actual CMS. And so this is pretty much your spreadsheet, your blueprint to all of your data. So here's how a spreadsheet or your CMS collection works. So you are pretty much creating the back end to a like a Google spreadsheet. So now you can make in your rows or columns, you can add fields to fill out. So when you're creating collection, you're creating all of the data points you want entered in. So let's say you were to create a Nessie CMS. So on every time you posted a new blog about Nessie, let's say you wanted to set an image. So let's just create a collection real quick. I want to create a custom. Can I not create a custom one? Oops, create. So I have to use. So there was a way to. All right, we'll just click blog post for example. So this is their basic template for a blog CMS. So you can in here set up fields that you want filled out and displayed. So right here it says the name. So let's say we wanted this to be Nessie sighting. And then we could do over here, we could do location. And then you can create the data points you want to be filled out. We can add in new fields. We could add in, let's say, oh, I want to display now an image of Nessie. So add image of Nessie. And you will create what elements and fields you want to be filled out every time you create a new post in your CMS collection. So you'll build that in here, and then when you're going to go create one, So let's say we create the collection. I don't know if we can. Save changes. All right, here we go. So now we've created this. I should have named that. My bad. Guess we're not going to do that right now. I should have named this Nessie sightings or something. So now we can go and create a new Nessie sighting, and that now it shows all of the fields that we need to fill out to build that set of content. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So first off, you go in and you say, pure all the variables. I want this, 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 and this filled out. And every time you create another collection item, you fill out that same content. And that's really helpful for if you're creating let's say a blog project that you're handing off to a client, and you need every time to an image added or a description or meta text. You can create all of those requirements, and then they know what to fill in so that your blog post is complete. So you can very easily create a very detailed blog post, and then people can add in new items pretty easily. So that's how your CMS works. And we'll kind of get into that once we're actually going to go build one. All right, your next one is your e-commerce. I don't think we're going to tackle that in this project.
No.
I think that, yeah, that's just beyond our scope. And then, so the next one, let's just discard changes, is your asset panel. So in your asset panel, if you had all of your images in a folder, you can just drag all of those images and drop them right here. You can also click here and add your assets from the cloud or something like that. And that's where you'll find all your assets. So pretty straightforward.
So it's all logo graphics.
Yeah, employee images. Yes, exactly. And you can create folders for, yeah, your branding, for whatever you need to. So that's that. Your settings, I don't think there's anything we need to cover further in depth in here. And then we already talked about your assets, or your audit panel. Oh, so this is interesting. So you can see right now we're getting flagged for one item. So that's kind of cool. So right here it said, there's link content, blah, 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 blah. So it's now complaining about our brand. This right here, this brand thing is linked. There's a link on it. And so it's just letting us know that there's nothing's happening right there. So we can click on the little audit arrow, send us to the issue. It now brings us there and tells us what's wrong and what we should fix. So that's kind of cool.
Nice.
All right, so that's a lot to cover, but that is our HTML, the structure, how you're going to add assets, how you're going to add blog or CMS content, how you're going to add pages, how you're going to add elements to the page, and then your Navigator where you can see what elements that have been added to your page. So I think we'll wrap that up for now. We'll give you some time to kind of mull and digest that, and then on our next video, I think we'll start talking about the designer panel where you can start styling things, and we'll go in depth into that. So is there anything else you wanted to cover on any questions you had about this before we wrap this video up?
Give me time to digest. I like it.